The NBA's player movement cycle never really seems to stop, and one of the things that's the most fun about it is how unpredictable it can be. It's not very often that we know exactly what's going to happen in a particular offseason, so in this video, I want to talk about 5 players that I think could get moved this offseason, despite the fact that it would be pretty surprising if they did. And of course, I've got some fake trades for almost every one of these players in this video as well. We begin with DAngelo Russell of the Minnesota Timberwolves, and the reason why this would be surprising is that Minnesota had their best season in years, one of their best seasons in franchise history, quite frankly, certainly since Kevin Garnett left the franchise. This is a team that clearly has momentum behind them as a younger roster that really gave Memphis a good series in that first round and arguably should be playing in the second round right now. And so it would be surprising to see them move a younger player in DAngelo Russell, a guy that's been a core and a foundational piece for them for the last couple of seasons, has a good relationship with Karl-Anthony Towns. But here is my reasoning for this. I'm not necessarily advocating for them to move DAngelo Russell. I'm just saying it could happen and it would be pretty surprising if it did. Everything from Minnesota moving forward, I think, should be prioritized around what works with Anthony Edwards, not necessarily Karl-Anthony Towns. I think he has passed Cat in the hierarchy of who we need to build around moving forward. And I'm not sure that DAngelo Russell is the kind of player that elevates what Anthony Edwards does, because I want Anthony Edwards to have the basketball in his hands. I want him to grow and develop into one of the better perimeter scorers, playmakers, decision makers in the entire league. And if that's the case, D'Lo's value is really decreased, except for when Anthony Edwards isn't on the floor. Not only that, but I think defensively there's something there for Edwards as well, where if he really commits to that end of the floor, he can be one of the better two-way players in the entire league. And I'd like to pair him with somebody that can complement that skill set and also be a good perimeter defender. And I don't think that DAngelo Russell is that guy. I think he's a solid player. I think he can play make, he can score a little bit. He's a good player. I just don't know that given the needs on the rest of this roster, that he's the guy that you want to keep around. I don't think he's a ceiling raiser for them moving forward. They have 2 really high upside guys in Cat and Edwards. And I just think that D'Lo is a bit of a weird fit within that. I think it's very easy to convince yourself of that, which could instigate a trade. In terms of a possible move, this might feel like, selling low on DAngelo Russell in terms of value, but I think going to get someone like Jeremy Grant, adding Kelly Olynyk for some front court shooting as well, adding a wing, adding a versatile two-way player to play alongside Anthony Edwards, to play alongside Karl-Anthony Towns, I think that kind of spreads out the talent of this roster pretty well. I really like Jared Vanderbilt, but I don't necessarily think that he should be considered a starter on a team that has aspirations of being a conference finals team over the next couple of seasons. So upgrading the Jared Vanderbilt spot, I feel like, is something that could be really impactful for this team. Jeremy Grant fills a nice role there, and even though there's a little bit of a drop off there in terms of other guys you have on the roster that can create other than Edwards, I think that's a little bit easier of something to fix than what you would want to get out of Jeremy Grant. I just think that could potentially make more sense for this roster. Next up now is a big one, and it's Tyler Herro, because I feel like a lot of people are just assuming that this Heat roster is pretty much set over the next couple of seasons, with the exception of some minor tweaks. I mean, they're the 1 seed in the East this year, despite not being very healthy for the entirety of the season, and they clearly or at least a conference finals caliber team. And so moving a younger player like Tyler Herro, who's going to continue to grow and develop and get better, doesn't really make a ton of sense in that context. However, we've seen this group, not necessarily this exact same team. They added Kyle Lowry, they added PJ Tucker, but we saw them literally last year not be on the same level of a team as this year. And it's just very easy for them to go up and down. And when you have an asset like Tyler Herro, someone that wins the 6th Man of the Year award, someone that scores 20 points per game off the bench, is a younger player, and you have a core around that for the most part is aging, Jimmy Butler, Kyle Lowry, obviously Bam being the exception there, I think it makes a good amount of sense to at least explore the possibility of moving Herro in exchange for someone that is more of an offensive creator, someone that can be a little bit more established. And then if you can bring someone in that maybe isn't a complete zero on the defensive end of the floor the way the Herro is at times, for example, someone like Zach LaVine, then you get into a situation where Duncan Robinson can play in more of these games. I think the reason why he's not playing is because they don't feel like he can guard well enough to be on the floor with Herro at the same time, and then all of a sudden it just gets really difficult to find significant minutes for him. So if they move Herro in this case, they bring in one of these guards that we're going to talk about throughout this video and throughout this offseason. I think that's an interesting concept for them. In this example, they're actually moving Herro and Duncan Robinson. Caleb Martin is there for salary purposes, and then 2 future first-round picks in exchange for Donovan Mitchell. Now, yes, that is a lot, but the problem with trading for Mitchell, if you're Miami, is that he's under contract for the next couple of seasons. It's going to require a lot in exchange to get him. I don't really know where fair is for this particular kind of deal, but conceptually, I think it's an interesting thing for them to take a look at moving Herro for Donovan Mitchell or another similar guard here. And that would obviously elevate their offense. And then the hope would be that you get Mitchell there, you get him into Miami, and he becomes a better defender. Fingers crossed. Next up now is a player that I think a lot of people are considering as a free agent this offseason. Obviously, he is. However, from a trade perspective, I think it makes more sense for him to be involved in sign and trades, and that is Bradley Beal. When you look at the teams around the league that are going to have cap space this offseason and a couple of different guards, whether it be Harden, LaVine, Beal, the options for them to go to some kind of big time team are not really there in free agency. Like Portland is intriguing with the fit alongside Dame, and that's about it. You're looking at San Antonio, you're looking at Orlando, and if these guys were to be moved this offseason, Beal in this case, I think it would be a sign and trade. I think it would be a situation like to Miami in exchange for Tyler Herro, potentially to New York, a variety of different options where they go to a market they want to be in basically as a free agent, but they use that free agency to leverage where they want to go so that the team, in this case Washington, that currently holds their rights, does not just lose that player for nothing. And I also would advocate, I've made this point in videos before, that for Washington and this roster, it kind of makes sense for them to go ahead and move on from Beal. He had a down year this year. He's someone that I'm not sure I really want to pay $200+ million to over the next, 5 or 6 seasons, whatever the length of the contract would be. That doesn't sound super intriguing to me when I'm looking at a roster that does not have a ton of upside moving forward. There's interesting young players in this roster. You've got KP if he can be healthy, but best case scenario, they're like a 45 win team. And I just don't think that I would want to or be excited about paying Bradley Beal a ton of money just to win 45 games every year. So a bit of a reset for them. In this case, he would be going to the Knicks in exchange for Derrick Rose, Nerlens Noel, RJ Barrett, and 2 future firsts, one from Dallas, one from New York, top 5 protected. Again, similar to the Mitchell deal. I don't really know where fair is in this particular situation. I think they would begin the conversation by asking for RJ Barrett and other stuff. But obviously in a sign and trade scenario, it's a little bit more difficult because Washington's leverage is limited given the fact that Beal could just leave and go somewhere even if it isn't New York. So there's a lot of complications there, but from a trade perspective, I think we could see Beal moved this offseason. Next up now is a very weird one, and it's Ben Simmons. And the reason it's weird is because he literally just got traded and he hasn't even played a game yet for the team that he was traded to. Now, I don't necessarily think that this one is going to happen, but again, just like with all these other players, conceptually, the idea does make at least a little bit of sense, because even though I still want to see what a healthy version of Ben Simmons looks like within this, environment of having Kyrie and having KD around him, and obviously trading a guy right after he has back surgery is not ideal from a value standpoint. However, if there's an opportunity to, for example, swap him in exchange for someone like Rudy Gobert, Utah is either trying to change things up or reset things a little bit. That is a straight up swap that does make at least a little bit of sense if you're Brooklyn, because if you're concerned about the long-term health of Ben Simmons and or his fit on the roster, you can bring in someone in Rudy Gobert that's going to protect the rim, is going to rebound, is going to shore up a lot of the things that Brooklyn really struggles with, and then he can be a pick and roll threat as well. If you're Utah, the upside would be it from a player standpoint, it's as good as you're going to get in exchange for Rudy Gobert. And the reason you're getting a player as possibly good as Simmons is because of the issues with his back and some of the concerns you have about his, desire to play basketball. So these are both kind of damaged assets. Gobert's value is a little bit low considering how he performs in the playoffs at times, and Simmons obviously because of the injury stuff. And basically both teams are crossing their fingers and hoping that this shakeup in their roster can propel them towards being championship contenders the following season. And the last up now is the only player I don't have a fake trade for, just because the trade machine was a little weird because they are legitimately a free agent, not a decline my player option free agent. And it's Zach LaVine, and his free agency situation is very intriguing. The news and the reports we're getting from it are not necessarily kind to Chicago. They're not necessarily saying, oh, well, he's guaranteed to come back. He wants to explore free agency, and I don't blame him for that. But again, when you look at the other options, unless he wants to just go and sign a contract in Portland and play alongside Damian Lillard, his options are limited. So again, you're looking at the possibility of him going to Miami in exchange for Tyler Herro, a variety of different options there for Zach LaVine. It just comes down to whether he wants to return to Chicago. They had a really good start to the year, and then by the time the playoffs rolled around, they just weren't very good. They were basically a 500 team for the last part of the year. Now, granted, they had a ton of injury issues, and DeRozan was incredible. It seemed like LaVine was really enjoying his time in Chicago, and I wouldn't be shocked at all to see him re-sign a big contract, but somebody is going to pay him a big number, and if he wants to just go to a different situation, whether it be New York, whether it be Miami, I think that is definitely an option to take a look at and pay attention to. And keep in mind that he has tried to leave Chicago before. There was an offseason in which he signed an offer sheet with Sacramento, and even though this year was certainly better than what he's experienced prior to in Chicago, there's been a lot of years of struggle here for Zach LaVine, and I'm not 100% certain that just because the vibes are a little bit better and DeRozan is there, and you can easily talk yourself into Chicago being a top 5 team in the Eastern Conference next year if he does return, there's no guarantee that he has really enjoyed his time in Chicago, going through multiple coaches, going through multiple rosters, and maybe, given the way that they ended the season, given the fact that by the end of the year, they weren't very good, they clearly weren't contenders, and after a strong start to the season, maybe LaVine is looking at a situation where he no longer is like the main guy. DeMar's kind of stepped into that role, and there's maybe not a lot of upside moving forward for this roster, and he's looking at an Eastern Conference where they're going to be, at best, the 6th seed moving forward, and he would rather go to a situation where either he has a better chance of contending for a title, or he is the main guy in a market like New York or Miami, and that could be much more appealing to him than whatever's happening in Chicago. Not to mention the fact that one of the reasons these rumors have started to swirl in the first place is because Chicago was apparently pretty hesitant to sign him to a full complete max. They're going to have to if they want to keep him. There could be some underlying resentment here, is all I'm saying, between LaVine and between Chicago. And if there wasn't, I feel like he would have already signed an extension. So combination of that and him basically saying he wants to enjoy his free agency makes me think this is a real possibility. And those are my 5 potentially shocking trades for this upcoming NBA offseason. Let me know down in the comment section below which players you think could be traded this offseason. My name is Tucker. Hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll see y'all next time.